Ready to explore a network that truly changed the world. Today we're diving into the Silk Road.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just silk or spices.
Right, like empires and ideas traveling across continents. Proof that people have always been curious.
You got it. And when we say Silk Road, it wasn't just one road.
Okay, good point.
Picture a massive web of roads. Over 4,000 miles. Can you imagine? Merchants crossing mountains, deserts, everything, connecting east and west for centuries.
History is right. It all started way back in the 2nd century BCE, during China's Han Dynasty, wasn't it?
Exactly, the Han Dynasty.
What was so special about that time period? Just a quick reminder for everyone.
Well, it was a golden age for China, a time of huge growth, very stable.
So perfect for something as ambitious as the Silk Road to really get going.
Exactly. And one thing a lot of people don't realize, it wasn't just a one-way flow of goods from east to west, it was a two-way street.
I see. So both ways, an exchange of all sorts of things.
Oh yeah. Goods, ideas, cultures, it left a mark on everything, from what we wear to our religions.
Amazing. Okay, but we have to talk about the silk.
Of course.
It's right there in the name. Why was silk so special? Why did everyone want it?
Well, silk was China's treasure. Luxurious. Everyone wanted it. And for centuries, it was their secret, like a national treasure.
I can imagine.
The production was super controlled, very valuable. It was even used as currency sometimes.
Wow. Getting paid in silk. That's pretty stylish. But it wasn't just China, right? The Romans, weren't they crazy for silk?
Oh, the Romans loved it. They couldn't get enough. It caused quite a stir there. You had senators debating its impact.
Really, what were they worried about?
Some thought that silk's softness, they thought it was making Romans weak, hurting their tough image.
That's funny, debating how soft a fabric is. Some things never change. But beyond fashion, what I find really interesting is how the Silk Road was like this big mixing of cultures.
Yeah, that's what makes it so fascinating. You have Buddhism coming from India, moving eastward, and you see all these temples and monasteries popping up all along the Silk Road.
Right, I've seen pictures.
And these weren't just religious places. Think of them like cultural hubs.
Okay.
Places for merchants and travelers to rest, pray, tell stories from their travels.
I like that. The Silk Road was like a living history book. But speaking of cultures mixing, how did Islam change the Silk Road?
Well, as Arab traders became more and more important, you started to see mosques along the routes.
Sure.
These mosques, they had blends of architecture, a real sign of how connected everything was becoming.
It's mind-blowing how religions and ideas traveled right alongside the silks and the spices. So we got Buddhism, we've got Islam. What about other things like art? Did that travel too?
Definitely. Think about this. Chinese papermaking and their printing traveled west.
That's huge.
Right, and at the same time, Western art, it started influencing Chinese pottery. You can still see that mix of styles in art today, a real artistic dialogue between continents.
That's really cool. Okay, now I want to shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the people who actually did all this traveling, the merchants. What was it like for them on these long, dangerous journeys?
Okay, picture this. You're a merchant. You're out in the Gobi Desert. It's scorching hot. You're watching out for bandits. You're relying on your camels.
Camels, the ships of the desert,
That's it.
all for the chance to get rich and bring back stories from faraway places. It must have been a life full of risk and adventure. But did they bring back more than just goods?
Of course, they brought spices and fabrics, jewels, artwork, but also stories, philosophies, religions. They really shaped how people back home saw the world. They were like the original global citizens, connecting everyone, one caravan at a time.
It's amazing to think about. Their stories are like threads weaving together all these cultures. But like all good things, it couldn't last forever, right? What led to the Silk Road's decline?
Well, empires had a lot to do with it. Think about it. Powerful empires like the Mongols, they brought stability, and stability is crucial for trade.
Right, I get that.
But when those empires fell apart,
Things got less stable?
exactly. The trade routes, they weren't safe anymore. It got really dangerous for the merchants. Plus, there was the rise of sea routes in the 15th century.
Right. Ships could carry a lot more.
Exactly. And they were faster, more efficient than any caravan on land, and a lot less risky, to be honest.
So it's like the age of exploration. It opened up new routes, but on the water.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even though the actual routes faded, the impact of the Silk Road, it didn't go away. It lasted much longer. It's a legacy that's still with us today.
Now you've really got me interested. What do you mean? What happened after the Silk Road faded?
Well, we'll dive into that right after this. Stick with us. When we talk about the Silk Road, we can't forget it wasn't just about empires or these huge trade routes. It was about people, individuals.
Right. The merchants themselves.
Exactly. Their stories of resilience, their ingenuity. They weren't just moving goods. They had to navigate politics, different languages, all these cultural customs.
I bet they had some amazing stories when they got home.
Oh, for sure.
Can you imagine what it was like in those marketplaces? Like Baghdad, Xi'an, Samarkand. The sights, the sounds.
Oh, it must have been incredible. Every stop was like a new world.
Right.
Imagine the colors of those fabrics, the smells, all those spices from faraway lands, cloves, cinnamon, peppercorns, and the languages. Merchants bartering in languages you wouldn't even understand.
It's fascinating how, even with all that unfamiliarity, trade was this common language. It crossed all those cultural differences.
It really did. They built a global community based on trade and curiosity. And it wasn't just things they exchanged, they shared stories, knowledge, ideas. It subtly changed how everyone saw the world.
Okay, I have to ask, give me an example. What kind of ideas traveled that really changed things?
Well, how about something we use every day? Paper.
Paper.
It was a Chinese invention, traveled west, completely changed how information was shared and preserved in the West.
Wow, that's a great example. We take paper for granted now, but it had a huge impact. And it wasn't just technology, was it? Religion spread too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, they all found new followers along the Silk Road. And those religions, they didn't stay the same. They changed, adapted as they met new cultures. That's how we got all the different branches and interpretations we see today. It really enriched the world's spiritual tapestry.
It really shows how cultures aren't isolated. They learn from each other, blend together, and something new emerges. It makes you realize we've always been connected in some way.
It's like a dance. Cultures influencing each other, step by step, creating something way more complex than any one culture could do alone. That's one of the most powerful legacies of the Silk Road, I think. It reminds us that we need to connect, exchange, collaborate. Those are essential for human progress.
That's a lesson we could really use today. The world feels so divided sometimes. The Silk Road gives us hope. It shows what's possible when we embrace our shared humanity and try to connect with each other. So, centuries later, how do we see the Silk Road's influence in our lives?
Let's start with something everyone loves: food. Think about those spices I mentioned. Cloves, cinnamon, peppercorns. They traveled west along the Silk Road. Many of the spices we use every day came from there.
So the Silk Road is why we have spicy food. Never thought of it that way.
It's more than just ingredients, though. Culinary techniques were shared, adapted. That led to the fusion of flavors that define so many cuisines today. Take pasta, for example.
Pasta.
It's believed to have come from China originally, traveled west, and eventually became a staple in Italian cuisine.
Now that's interesting. Pasta's journey from China to Italy is a story in itself. But beyond food, what about knowledge? Didn't math travel along the Silk Road too? Like important concepts.
Absolutely. The concept of zero, for example, a fundamental idea in math. It traveled from India to the West via the Silk Road. Think about a world without zero. It's hard to imagine. Its impact on math, science, even how we understand the universe is huge.
That's true. It makes you wonder what other groundbreaking ideas were exchanged on those journeys. But let's be real. It wasn't all perfect, right? There must have been downsides to the Silk Road.
Oh yeah, of course. The Silk Road wasn't without its problems. Conflicts, competition for resources, even exploitation. Not all interactions were positive or equal. We have to acknowledge that.
That's right. It reminds us that history is complicated. We can appreciate the achievements of the Silk Road while also recognizing that it wasn't always good.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances, learning from the triumphs, but also the failures of the past.
So as we wrap up this part of our exploration, what's the most important takeaway from the Silk Road for us today?
For me, it comes down to this: the power of cultural exchange. It's through understanding and appreciating different perspectives that we can build a more inclusive, harmonious world. That's a message that's still relevant today, centuries after the Silk Road faded away.
It's amazing, isn't it? How something from so long ago, like the Silk Road, can still teach us so much today. So as we finish up our deep dive, what do you think is its biggest legacy? What really stands out?
I keep coming back to this idea of connection, how the world has always been interconnected. The Silk Road wasn't just about trading stuff. It was about ideas moving, new things being invented, and how cultures express themselves. All those things still affect us today.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy to think of history as something separate from our lives now. But the Silk Road is actually woven into our world. like literally.
Exactly. Think about it, even what we're wearing right now, our clothes, it goes back to the Silk Road.
Really? How so?
Well, fabrics were traded, fashion trends moved along those routes, they changed styles across continents, and that influenced how we dress today.
That's wild. Like a fashion time capsule almost. Trends from centuries ago showing up in our closets now. But it's not just fashion, is it? I mean, languages, the stories we tell, music,
Yeah.
those all came from somewhere.
You're exactly right. The Silk Road was like a highway for culture. Instruments, stories, art, they all traveled those routes. And as they went, they mixed with local cultures. And that created totally new ways to be creative.
It shows how culture is always changing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not fixed. And the Silk Road played a big part in that.
For sure. Our world is like a tapestry made up of all these different cultures. And when we understand and appreciate those differences, our own lives get richer. It helps us build a more vibrant future where everything's connected.
That's a great way to put it. So as we end our journey along the Silk Road, I'm just amazed by how connected our world is. It's a story that shows our shared history and how powerful it is when cultures mix and share.
And the most important thing to remember, I think, is that the spirit of the Silk Road is still alive. That desire to connect, explore, share new ideas, it's just as relevant today as it was back then.
It is. It encourages us to be curious, to try new things, to look for connections that can help us understand the world and ourselves better. And that's what we hope you take away from this deep dive. We hope it's inspired you to keep learning about this fascinating part of history, and maybe to see how its lessons can help us navigate our world today, a world where everything's connected.